The commercialization of Christmas and Hanukkah sometimes obscures their true spiritual meaning.
Sometimes religious organizations themselves do the worst job of holding up the meaning of our holiest days.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Andrea Luxton, and I am the moderator for today's show. We have a wonderful topic and some great panelists, and I'd like them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start here on my right.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister of First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas, which is affiliated with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Hello, my name is Mel Robeck. I'm senior professor of church history and ecumenics and special assistant to the president for ecumenical relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I'm also a minister of the Assemblies of God.
Most Christians understand that December the 25th is most likely not the day Christ was really born. Many scholars believe he was actually born in early fall during the Feast of Tabernacles because there was no room in the inn. This would make late December the time that Jesus was conceived, thus celebrating the true miracle of Christmas from a more heavenly viewpoint. Christians believe Jesus is the reason for the season. Gifts are exchanged in honor of the gift of all gifts found in Christ. Hanukkah means dedication in Hebrew and is celebrated not just one day, but for 8 days from November 28th, 2021 to December 6th, 2021. The Festival of Lights commemorates the victory of the Maccabees over the Syrian Greek army. Only one vial of oil illuminated the temple, not just for one day, but it lasted a full 8 days. So the story of Hanukkah teaches that Jewish people, children and adults, must stand up in the face of oppression and refuse to disappear into the darkness of surrounding cultures. Gift-giving among Jewish children is a more recent tradition, but not just because of the influence of Christmas. Rabbi Menachem Creditor states, Hanukkah wants to be like Christmas. It was so Jewish children would have joy on Hanukkah. During this holiday season, we are asking our panelists to consider the following questions. 1, how do we teach our children the true meaning of our holiday traditions and reduce the over-commercialization and selfish obsession of putting more and more things or toys? Secondly, we live in a very dark world. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "We have a choice to light a candle or curse the darkness." How do we do that all year? And finally, if Hanukkah Harry is like Santa Claus and Hanukkah bushes are like Christmas trees, how can we discover new ways to stay off the naughty list and light candles that brighten our world and make it twice as nice? Back to the two individuals who introduced our topic today, and let's hear what you have to say. Bye-bye.
So it's wonderful to be with all of my friends and with everyone here today. In thinking about the celebration of Hanukkah, I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to talk more about the Christmas celebration. It's interesting to see how the holiday itself emerges over time. The original idea of Hanukkah actually was a second celebration of the Festival of Tabernacles, the Festival of Sukkot, as we would say in Hebrew. During the period where the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem was being used as a Greek temple, the Jews fought to restore their homeland and their sovereignty. And so the Hasmoneans, led by the Maccabees, restored that place in the darkness of December, of the month of Kislev in Hebrew. And so they said, well, we didn't celebrate this very important festival at the time of year it's supposed to be celebrated, so better late than never. And in fact, if you read the book of Maccabees, there's a letter that's sent to the Jewish community in Alexandria 40 years later that says, hey, don't forget the second celebration of Sukkot. Well, why did they have to send that letter? Because a lot of people 40 years later said, why are we celebrating Sukkot a second time? And so there came to be a new understanding of that festival as being a festival of light, remembering that even in the darkest of times, the light of faith can secure us. The story of the miracle of the oil doesn't appear until much, much later in the story of the Talmud that appears in the 3rd century, which says, why is Hanukkah 8 days? Well, because of this story that they found only one cruse of oil to light the menorah, to light the eternal lamp that was to be shining in the inner sanctuary, and yet it lasted for 8 days. And why was that? Well, because at that time, the rabbis were not interested in restoring the memory of the Maccabees. They had already seen the horror of the destruction by the Romans in the Judean revolt, and then 70 years later, the Bar Kokhba revolt didn't end much better. And so they said, better we should give a story that teaches that we should rely on God's providence to redeem us, not on our own agency. And the reason why I share this history of Hanukkah is because over time, based on the experiences and the conditions in which people found themselves, the meaning of that holiday took on the significance that it needed to express for those days and those times. And I think that because the word Hanukkah itself means dedication, it's a time when we're supposed to be reminded about to what are we dedicated, what are our first principles, and what will we stand up for and never sacrifice those first principles, even in the case when there are dangers to ourselves, to physically and personally. And so the idea of giving gifts during that period was an idea that happens through the minor festivals in Jewish tradition of Mishloach Malot, of giving gifts that would sometimes just sweeten the holiday, whether it was a gift of food, something sweet like a jelly donut, which is cooked in oil to remember the story of the oil, or a little bit of gelt, so some few coins. But that has taken on commercialization, and things like Hanukkah Harry and Hanukkah bushes have no place in Jewish tradition. And I think they may be fun, but they really, I think, obscure the real meaning of what the holiday is supposed to be about.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. I think the contrast between fun and meaning is a good one. Because Christmas has suffered in the same way. One of the things that I think it's important for Christians to understand is that throughout Christian history, there wasn't a whole lot of celebration at Christmas time. Christmas Day was a festival day, but it had nowhere near the sort of trappings that it began to take on only about 100 years ago, only in the 20th century. Throughout Christendom, the day is a festival to talk about how Jesus came to say that God is available, that God is among us, that God is with us. It's a celebration of that strangest of Christian doctrines, I think we might say, that Jesus carried was so much like the divinity that he carried. He was fully human and yet fully divine. This is the day, or this is the season that crazy idea is put out there by the Christian community, that this human being bore within himself the stuff of divinity. He also said we can bear that too, I think, and that's one of the things we want to get away from. So we've covered it up with all sorts of trees and garland and songs about snow and sleigh bells, which are only ever a part of the traditions of Christmas that are very recent and only in certain parts of the world. And so the church itself often obscures the true meaning. You know, one of the things that I think is really difficult for church folk when we start in Advent and we start moving toward Christmas, and we all of a sudden say, let's decorate and let's get happy and everything's got to be joyous. But the first Sunday in Advent, we are taken to the voice of the prophet, and the prophet saying, things aren't right, and we're not right, and things have to change radically, fundamentally. And that's a hard message to continue to say when everybody around you is wanting to say, it's time for jolly, and let's talk about Santa Claus, and let's make all of our preparations for this great festival.
All right, thank you. Any other perspectives from the rest of our panelists?
Well, you threw out the tree there. I mean, that's the one Lutheran thing I think that has influenced our whole culture. So I got it from Martin Luther, who put lights on the tree. Again, symbolic of Christ being the light of the world and enlightening the darkness. It's no accident that this holiday also appears. And Mel, you may know more detail than I do as a church historian, but the December 25th is also one of the darkest days of the year, and so even those who were of Greek culture had their own celebrations about that darkness. And so, as I understand the Christian tradition, much like a lot of Christians don't go out and celebrate Halloween like the culture does, they create their own little Christian celebrations of resurrection and life, and that we don't have to be scared of the darkness. So Christians created, if you will, they said, this is a time when everyone else is partying. Let's celebrate something that's significant to us, which was Christ coming into the world and being born. I think that sometimes if you ever try to celebrate the Feast of the Ascension of Jesus, no one shows up ever at worship services. You know, there could be all the secularization and all the commercialization, but I think it does one good thing, and it does still keep in the minds of the culture the importance of these holidays. Because I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about Hanukkah until it got commercialized, and then I'm going, oh, this is really interesting. And then I started looking and reading, and I understand a lot more about it. So I think it can be an entry actually into understanding the holiday and the celebration, the religious meaning even more deeply, because our culture continually brings it up. And so it's an opportunity for us to help people understand what it is. So that's one take.
Okay. And I think you bring up an interesting feature there, Carl, in that is the relationship between the church and culture, between Judaism and culture. The culture always wins, it seems, and I think that's where the commercialization comes in. You know, when I'm thinking of Southern California, you know, we celebrate Cinco de Mayo in big ways in Southern California because we're so close to Mexico. But it wasn't the Mexicans that started that.
No.
It was the businessmen in Los Angeles that started it and said, look, we can get the Mexicans to come in and buy our materials if we celebrate Cinco de Mayo. So that's how it really got started in Southern California. And you could go through the Day of the Dead and Halloween, and how that's also changed over the years. So Christmas and Hanukkah are, I think, in the very similar kinds of things. And I want to differ with you a little bit, Tom, on how ancient this is. I mean, because I think the culture has impacted the church clearly, and I think the winter equinox, for instance, the darkest, the Yule log and all of that it's all part of the Christmas tradition as part of the larger culture. I think we're saying, well, we don't want to be left out of the culture. But I want to go back to something that, Dan referred to about Hanukkah and the Feast of Lights and so forth. I know that there are a lot of Protestants that do not read the Apocrypha or the pseudepigraphic books. And I think that's really a major loss for us if we are to understand the history of the people of God. Paul tries to help us understand that Christianity is rooted in Judaism. We cannot have Christianity apart from Judaism. We are part of them, they are part of us. If we even understood that, it might back us away from anti-Semitism, for crying out loud. So, I really think it's important for Christians to read especially the apocryphal books, and especially, I would say, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, because that is Jewish history that leads into our history. We can understand our history a lot better as Christians if we have an understanding of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And there is this place where the Greek king, Antiochus Epiphanes, comes in, and he actually sacrifices a pig on the altar in the temple of Jerusalem. It's a sacrilegious, it's blasphemous act, and when the Mattathias and his sons come in and kick the Greeks out and take over the temple and want to purify that temple, they even rebuild the altar. They dismantle the old one until the prophet comes. They put a new one in place, and they re-sanctify, re-purify the altar. I think that's incredibly important. But one of the ways that we can, I think, help spread light, even about Hanukkah, is to teach our children what its real meaning is. As children, I had 4 sons, and I carved dreidels so that they knew what a dreidel was. Put the Hebrew letters on them, had them spin them, play the game, learn the song, and so forth. And we bought a menorah, and we celebrated for 8 nights. For several years, we did that with our sons, to help them understand what this was about. And I think when they go to class in school, they have some sense of what other children, Jewish children, are going through.
All right, really interesting conversation. So are we saying 11-year-olds, no bikes?
No, I think we're not saying that. And it's interesting, in Jewish tradition, there are what they call the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festivals that are mentioned in the book of Leviticus: the festival of Sukkot, Tabernacles, the festival of Passover, and the festival of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, which comes 7 weeks after, that celebrates the giving of Torah and 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. And so the later festivals, Purim, which celebrates the story of the book of Esther, and Hanukkah, which comes from the Apocrypha, are what they call the minor festivals. Mm-hmm. They're not minor because they're any less important. They're minor because they're not sort of the big 3. And I think that part of what we've done in Jewish tradition over years is we've tried to actually say, don't make such a big deal about Hanukkah. And I think that's actually a mistake, because Hanukkah, in the way that it's evolved, sort of accentuates all those values that we cherish as Jews: family and community, the idea of giving tzedakah, of giving to those who are needy, and to accentuate light and darkness, and the importance of us as spiritual agents to shine that light of God's presence into dark places. Those are meanings and messages that I think are important to celebrate. So if you can get a lot of people to say, hey, let's make a big deal about that festival, hey, I'm all for that.
Great. All right, let's go into the break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back, everybody. We're having a very intriguing conversation today related to Hanukkah, related to Christmas, commercialization, and how we put those two things together. How do we keep the true meaning, but yet recognize that we're living in a culture that is also impacting our children particularly. So let's have some closing comments.
Thank you. I'll begin. One of the things that I hope people have gotten from this conversation is that we have powerful stories to tell at these festival times. The stories of rich meaning about God's power and presence among us in the world. And what we have to guard against is that our feasting and our partying and our celebration and our lighting of things doesn't obscure the fact that the lighting is about bringing light into the darkness and about the first becoming last and the last first, and good news for poor folks and blind folks and folks that are on the bottom end of things. So let's tell the powerful stories that we have to tell, and let that be the source of the celebrations.
I completely agree, and in fact, I mean, that was a part of our family tradition, was always to not only go to church and worship and celebrate Christmas, to learn the religious meaning, but it was to recite again the story even at home and talk about its meaning before we did any of the gift giving and opening. But then even in the giving and gift opening, I think it was important that in the process our kids learned that it really is about the giving, in an attempt to instill that virtue about giving. Now that I'm older, I've gotten to the point to where my wife and I have said, you know, instead of giving something to us, because we don't really need anything, how about giving to someone else? Like please give, but give to someone else in lieu of. And I mean, there's a lot of different ways, I think, to accentuate the kind of spiritual and ethical meaning of Christmas.
As I think about it, I am just overwhelmed by how culture has impacted everything that we do these days, and how secularized even the religious realities that we believe in have become for so many people. So I would just say that the first thing we need to do is go back and reread the texts, the biblical texts, the apocryphal texts, and try to figure out where do we fit with these, and how do these fit into our contemporary situation. Don't start with culture, which is what we almost always do, but start with the biblical and apocryphal texts and reflect upon those. And I think what we find there is that God is with us. God is trying to show us something that He wants before us. He is sending His Son. It's the incarnation of God into the midst of humanity, which has transformative power that we didn't really realize until He came. And as for Hanukkah, you can always look at the holiness of God, the sanctity of that altar, the purification of the temple, the light and the darkness motifs, which are run throughout Scripture, Old and New Testament. And I think it's really important for us to capture what that means for us. Let us talk about it. Let our churches talk about it. And think seriously about how we're going to impact the culture instead of always the culture reaching out and impacting us. I think we have a real calling here, if you would, to help people understand that. And again, as I say, I taught my kids about Hanukkah so that they could bear witness to what Jewish students, they could identify with them, they could tell the story. And in fact, in several places, there were no Jews in the class, and the teacher would say, "Does anybody here know about Hanukkah?" And my kids could say, "Yes, I do." "Well, would you tell us what you know?" And they would tell the story. We let them take dreidels to school and gelt to school to share with all the students so that they had some sense of what this was about, but they had the biblical or the apocryphal story to make their point.
So in the Talmud, there's a debate among the rabbis about how you commemorate Hanukkah with what's called a Chanukiah or a Hanukkah menorah, an 8-branched menorah. And there was the school of Shammai that says you start with 8 lights and then you go 7, 6, 5, 4. And then the school of Hillel says, no, you start with 1 light and you move up to 8. Yeah. And the law goes according to Hillel. So they say, well, how come? And there's a principle that says, Ein moridin b'kedusha. You do not descend in holiness. You only move up in holiness. And I think that that teaching is something that we need to hold fast in our focus as part of our commemoration of these winter holidays. To remember that it is our duty and our responsibility to figure out ways when we can only ascend in holiness. So when we think about how we prioritize our celebration of these holidays, which isn't to say that we should eliminate gifts and that we should tamp down our celebration or ignore the joy, but to make sure that we channel that energy into doing things that are productive, that are meaningful, that are holy, and that are good. In our congregation, we have a project called the Giving Tree. The Giving Tree is a huge project that our congregation undertakes in the community to ensure that not only Jewish families, but our Christian neighbors who are maybe underprivileged have some gifts for the holy time. We serve more than 2,000 households. And it is a massive undertaking by the whole community to share that holiday spirit, because it's not just about making sure that a young person has a basketball or a bicycle. It's about ensuring that the joy and the privileges that we might have, those of us who have plenty, are able to share that with those who have less. And so I guess my last message would be that just like the Maccabees had to hold on to their hope, had to hold on to their faith, had to search for that light in the midst of the darkness, so do we encourage everyone, no matter your religious tradition, in the midst of these winter holidays, to keep your focus on moving forward and searching for the light.
Excellent. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.